Hi, hello friends. Welcome back to Love English with Sel. This is the third lecture in the series of lectures on literary criticism. In classical criticism, we have completed Greek criticism by understanding the concepts put forth by Plato and Aristotle. Today, here we begin Roman criticism with the concepts of Horace. I welcome all of you to this video. Let's get started. Let's begin today's discussion by understanding Roman criticism. Here is an introduction to Roman criticism. We can see around the 1st century BC, the center of literary and cultural activity shifted from Alexandria in Greece to Rome, the capital of the Roman Empire. With the age of Augustus Caesar, the great Roman emperor, there drawn a golden age of poetry and criticism, dominated by the figures of Virgil, Ovid, and Horace. So these three persons were the major figures during this Augustan rule or Augustan age. We can see some factors really influence the flourishing of arts and letters. So there are several factors contributed to this flowering of the arts and letters. The first one is, during the period of Augustus Caesar, he and his courtiers patronized art. So there was enough opportunity for artists to grow and develop. Second is that it was an age of peace, not war. So men turned to literature to achieve distinction. So we can see in a very peaceful atmosphere, we can grow in a very creative manner, right? So here is an age of peace, and the artists or the poets or those literary enthusiasts, so they turn to literature to achieve their distinction. And the third point is that there was an upsurge of nationalism in Rome, and a need was felt to equal or excel the Greek masters. As we all know, the literary works from Greece is considered to be far more superior than any other works from the world, right? Any other works from other countries. So here Rome, as it got nationalistic spirits, so it tried to get back to a very classical kind of literature. They wanted to create a literature that is equal or that can excel up to the Greek masters. So there was a revival of Greek classicism in Rome. Both Virgil and Horace pleaded for the study of Greek classics. So in order to be equal to the Greek masters, we have to study and analyze those works, right? Those classical works. So here, Virgil and Horace encouraged people to study Greek classics. We can see a number of poetasters, that is inferior poets. Okay. So fourth point is that a number of poetasters were turning inferior verse, corrupting and degrading public taste. So there was increased critical activity against it. So here we can see the emergence of literary criticism as well. So with the presence of poetasters, here comes literary criticism flourishing in Rome. Okay, so this was the scenario, the contemporary scenario when the Roman criticism or the classical criticism got accelerated. Okay, now we can have a look into the life of Horace. Horace was born somewhat around 65 BC and was died in 8th BC. Okay, his full name is Quintus Horatius Flaccus. He was born in Apulia in Italy. He is considered to be the greatest Roman poet, critic, and satirist. He is considered to be the greatest Roman practical poet and critic. Okay, Horace's literary work consists of satires, odes, and epistles. The most famous epistle was Epistula and Pisones, or Ars Poetica. That is the art of poetry, or Epistle to Pisos. So this particular work is famous as Epistula and Pisones, Ars Poetica, the art of poetry, Epistle to Pisos. So please do remember this work. Okay. Horace published his first book of satires most probably in 35 BC. 2 years after, he got the famous Sabine farm from Maecenas, which figures prominently in the book 2nd of his satires. So that was Horace's personal details, and we can see his very famous work Ars Poetica, and it is considered to be one of the path-breaking work as far as Roman criticism is concerned. Let's have a look into it. Okay, Ars Poetica. Horace began a new tradition in literary criticism, and he stands out as the most influential of Roman critics. Throughout his poetry, he runs a criticism of contemporary manners, morals, politics, and thought. The main body of critical theory is contained in Ars Poetica, that is, the art of poetry. It is a work which was equal to Aristotle's Poetics in its influence during the Renaissance. So, during the period of Renaissance, there was a revival of classical works, right? So, here, with the emergence of Aristotle's Poetics, we can see the emergence of Ars Poetica as well. We have to remember that this work was translated into English by Ben Jonson in the year 1640. The translation was published posthumously. We can see this treatise was in the form of a versified epistle or a letter that was addressed to a patron of the arts called El Pizzo. He's advising aspiring poets as to what they ought or ought not to do if they wish to succeed in their poetic ambition. So it is a kind of guide to the art of literary composition. Ars Poetica seems formless and unsystematic, but a closer examination reveals a well-marked scheme of treatment. So there is a pattern. So we can see the subject matter that were dealt in this poem that can be classified into three divisions, or it falls into three divisions. The first one is poiesis. So it can be said as the treatment of the subject matter of poetry or the content of poetry. Then we have the second subject matter, that is poema or poma, or that is the form of the poem or the style of poetry. The third one is poeta. It's about the poet, or it's a kind of discussion on poets. So these are the major divisions in this work. So Horace was well versed in these newer poetical forms, as he was very much well versed in these newer poetical forms of lyric, pastoral, ode, satire. So he tried to include or incorporate all these works and all these types of all these literary types into his work, and he analyzed the themes, stylistic elements, and the writing style of poets. And he tried to aim at to improve the efforts and talents of his contemporaries. He tried to point out this threefold structure, that is poiesis, poema, and poeta. Let's have a detailed understanding of each of these categories. Let's have a look into it. The first one is poiesis. In this part, he talks about poetry. According to Horace, poetry is not merely an imitation. It is a creative adaptation. Ars Poetica opens with the assertion that a poem must have an organic unity. There must be an organic wholeness or a kind of organic unity. The poet is free to indulge in his fancy, but he must not create monsters or impossible figures. So, things should be normal and natural. There should not be the presence of any kind of supernatural or impossible figures. Okay, he introduced the term purple patch. So, Horace was the person who introduced the term purple patch, and it's a kind of brilliant or ornate passage in a literary composition, usually in the midst of mediocrity. So, purple patch is that it's a brilliant or ornate or embellished passage in a literary composition, usually in the midst of mediocrity. Then he talks about the subject, and he says that it should be chosen wisely. It should be simple and consistent. The language of poetry is different from any other works, and it should be finer and higher than the language of the common man. So, the language of poetry should be different from the language of the common man, and it should be finer and refined, and it should be superior to the common language of human beings. Okay. You can say a wise discretion or moderation must be exercised in the choice of words. So, the diction, the word choice should be very much discreet, and it should be accurate. And Horace recognized that language is in a constant process of change. There was a flux in language, and this change should be understood by the poet. He says that language is like a tree, and words are leaves which wither every year and are succeeded by new ones. So the old words will be replaced with new words, and it's like a tree. New leaves are coming up and old leaves are falling out. So such kind of a change was happening in language. A poet can coin new words and revive old ones, but this should be done with discretion, only when absolutely necessary. So you can add new words, you can delete old words, but it should all be done with necessary changes, but it should be done with a kind of discretion. Okay, you have to justify your actions. Okay, a particular genre should stick to the meter allotted to it by the ancient Greeks. So you have to understand that you can use any kind of meter, but it should be in resonance with the genre you are considering. Okay, so you have to understand the kinds in which classical Greek writers used to use these meters, and you have to incorporate this into your writings as well. For epic poetry, iambic pentameter should be used. For poems of complaint, elegiac verse should be followed. For tragedy or comedy, iambic verse, so on. So he put forth some suggestions like epic poetry should be written in iambic pentameter, and for poems of complaint, it should be written in elegiac verse. And we can see for tragedy or comedy, it should be in iambic verse, and so on. So this is the most thoroughly handled of the three divisions, and he talks about drama as well. Drama as a form of poetry is treated at length to the exclusion of the lyric and the epic. So he is giving more focus on poetry and drama. He says that the plot should be based on old familiar stories, and novelty may be imparted by skillful treatment. So you can take a plot from old familiar stories, but you have to include novelty with your skillful treatment. Okay, new themes may be invented, but for the successful treatment, the poet requires great skill. So that is the case with a dramatist as well. Okay, new themes, you can add new themes, but it should be used in a very discreet manner. Okay, you have to use your great skill for that. A plot construction should be plunged straight into the middle of things, that is in media res. So he says that a narration should be beginning in media res. Okay, or the middle of action or the middle of things. Okay, as in the case of Homer. Okay, comic themes should not be treated in the lofty vein of tragedy, or tragic themes in the low vein of comedy. So that is known as decorum. We will discuss it later. Okay, comic themes should not be treated in lofty vein of tragedy, or tragic themes in the low vein of comedy. There should not be any kind of mixing up. All the incidents of the plot should have a logical connection. So there should be a proper beginning, there should be a proper middle, and an end. The events that were mentioned in a work should be chronologically arranged or logically connected. And in characterization, the poet must be true to life. So he should choose natural characters or lifelike characters, and he should be true to life. So that was Poesis. Now we heard Poema. In this portion, he talks about characters. Characters must be consistent. Those drawn from tradition must preserve their traditional traits. The quality of characters must fit their respective ages. Children should be shown quick to anger and quick to cool. Boys fond of sports, reckless, fickle, high-spirited, etc. So these characters, the child characters or the children should be shown quick to anger, quick to cool. Okay, that was a kind of characterization of children. Now, the dramatist must know that he must know what to represent on the stage and what to report to the audience. So we show some things on the stage, and we may report something through any kind of characters on the stage. We may not show all those incidents on the stage, especially bloodshed and war. So these should be reported to the audience using any kind of characters. So all these arrangements should be wisely done. Ugly and horrible incidents should happen off stage. It should be reported to the stage, but it should be happening off stage. A play should not have more or less than 5 acts. There must be more than 3 characters in any one scene. The ghost should not intervene in the action unless when absolutely essential. So the involvement of ghosts should be regulated. Okay, you can use them, yeah, of course, but it should be absolutely essential. You can use them when it is essentially needed. The denouement should be natural. The denouement should be the natural outcome of the incidents and not a matter of chance. The chorus should form an integral part of the play. So chorus was a necessity or an essential part. The Greek model should be strictly followed. So that was the model set by Plato and Aristotle. You have to follow that. The poet who wants to achieve excellence must read them by day and meditate by night. He says that if you want to be a good poet, to achieve excellence, you must read them by day and meditate by night. That is, you have to read and edit and revise them. Okay. Next is poeta. He talks about poets. The art of poetry is the outcome of incessant toil. Okay, the art of poetry is the outcome of incessant toil. A poem should be revised, blotted, and pruned several times until it attains artistic excellence. So, as a continuation of the previous part, he talks about the need of meditating or brooding over a poem again and again. So the writer have to come back to his poem again and again and read and reread and unlearn his poem or rewrite his poem whenever needed. So it is needed for artistic excellence. The poet must not be in a hurry to publish his works and should let it stand for over a decade. So he says that we have to give time for the maturity of a poem or a work. Then only we can publish it. Okay, a poet must be a keen observer of men and manners. So it is the need of a poet to understand or to observe his surroundings, and he must be a keen observer of men and their actions or manners. Nobility and dignity of soul are also necessary for a poet. Regarding the function of poetry, Horace follows the general classical view that poetry should both teach and delight, with greater stress on teaching. So, didacticism and delight. So, when we consider these two aspects, he gives more stress or greater stress on didacticism or teaching. He says that a poet should instruct or please, or he may combine both these functions. But for the sake of pleasing, he should not indulge in romantic extravagances. Everything should be minimal. Okay. There should not be any kind of extravagances. He should aim at mixing pleasure with profit. He should be brief and crisp, for only then would when the people give heed to his instruction. Minor faults in poetry may be forgiven, because even good Homer knows. Okay. A poet should always try to avoid faults as much as they can. Okay, as much as he can. So, minimal faults are okay. More than that, it is not considered as apt for a poet. So he says that great poets have been great prophets. So a poet should not feel ashamed of his art. He must be proud of it. He should have the ability to foresee the future. He should have the ability to consider the human nature. We can see, he says that as is painting, so is poetry. Poetry merited the same careful interpretation that was in Horace's day reserved for painting. So, this kind of an interpretation was actually reserved for painters or artists. So here, artists who can paint, but here, poetry and poets also got the same merit. The idea of poetic madness or inspiration is absurd. Excess must be kept under restraint, so we have to control our words and emotions. The treatise ends with a satiric portrait of a mad poet. So that is how this work ends, Ars Poetica ends. In between we talked about decorum. Here I'm going to give you more details regarding decorum. He says that poetry should conform to the principle of decorum. He stresses the then standard rhetorical principle of decorum, which calls for a proper relationship between form and content, expression and thought, style and subject matter, diction and character. Okay, so this was mentioned in Ars Poetica, page number 312 to 315. So he says that there should be a proper relationship between form and content, expression and thought, style and subject matter, diction and character. So there should be coherence between all these. Okay. Decorum for Horace is the avoidance of incongruities. The very first sentence in Ars Poetica juxtaposes a human head and a horse's neck, a beautiful woman's torso with the tail of a hideous fish, and rhetorically asks if these were not ludicrous. Therefore, he would warn the poet never to confuse the genres or to mingle tragedy with comedy. So, there should not be any kind of mixing up of different genres. Tragedy should be tragedy, comedy should be comedy. There should not be any kind of tragic comedy. Okay, so that was his stand when we consider decorum. What are his major ideas? Let's have a brief summary or a quick summary. He said that he always cited examples from ancient Greeks. His basic requirement is sensibility or taste. Horace is more practical. In narration, he opts for medias res. The ultimate goal of poetry is to instruct and afford pleasure. He classified style into high style, middle style and low style, in which high style or the grand style was adopted by John Milton. We can see. Then we have his concept of imitation meant a recreation. It is not a blind imitation, so it's a recreation. He insisted on the clear distinction between rhetoric and poetics. Rhetoric is different, poetic is different. So these should be clearly distinct. Then he classified classical rhetoric into exordium, statement of case, partition, proof, refutation, peroration. Exordium was a kind of introduction. Then statement of case is the arrangement of arguments. And in the case of partition, it's a kind of division of arguments. Then proof is the evidence that were given to establish our arguments. Then refutation was a kind of denial of certain things. And peroration is the final conclusion. Okay. Then we can see the major achievements of Horace. Horace asserts the supremacy of classical Greek art and thus inaugurates a new phase in the history of literary criticism. Regarding the imitation of the ancients, he does not advocate slavish copying, but a process of recreation, adaptation, and evolution of something new out of the old. So you can create something new out of the old. His pronouncement on diction, form, unity, and brevity are of lasting value. Now what are his limitations? Horace's criticism contains much that is borrowed and lacks in originality. We can see he highly depends upon Aristotle. He highly depends upon classical Greek writers. Okay. His theories are not derived from actual literature but are based on the theories of Aristotle and their later interpretations. So these were his limitations. I think it's clear for you now, the major concepts put forth by Horace and the work Ars Poetica. If there are more doubts or any kind of queries, you can ask them in the comment box. If you like this video, please do like, share and subscribe to this channel.